I have a demo set up today. I'll take you through a little bit about why we did what we did, and I'll take you through a couple of examples as to what it all looks like. And that way we'll leave you with the idea that what we built actually does exist. It's not just data sheet promises and things that we closely hide that you can't actually see what things look like. The one thing that I will say is if you see something there, we have lots of time today, so feel free to ask questions. If your question will lead us completely in a different direction, I can maybe come back to it, but otherwise I'll go through a few things I think you'll find interesting as tech people. And yeah, let's just go for a bit of a ride here. So the reason why we kind of built what we built is that networking for the large part, I believe, is really broken. There's a lot of people who can build hundreds of VPN tunnels. That doesn't mean they like doing it. And really, VPNs are based on the same technology from several years ago, right? You sit down, there's a lot of variables. You type things like remote access network, the local endpoint, the remote endpoint. You type in a whole bunch of encryption parameters and policies. And if you make one mistake, something doesn't happen somewhere that you have to go troubleshoot because you put in the wrong subnet or the wrong IP or just the wrong timeout or something like that. So when we were trying to build the product from the ground up, we thought there's a couple things that we wanted to make sure that we checked off so that we could really change networking. And the first one is that nobody likes logging into consoles. If you have 50 products, logging into 50 different consoles to do what you want to do is how it was done because those products were built from the ground up to be managed from that console. Without almost fail, the management came later, right? At some point, somebody said, what would be cool is if I could make this change on 20 boxes. And so they invented a management program, which was basically this scripting, automating robot that would try to take what you're doing and roll it out en masse. The problem with that is if you've ever tried to do that across like hundreds of boxes, you know that usually it's the farthest one away from you physically that doesn't come back up, someplace you have to fly to. You have to hold the phone and somebody at the other end is very technical or untechnical and you're trying to tell them where to plug in wires and how to get you in. So we thought let's redo all of that and let's make it so that we could take some of the advantages from the SDN world, right? The massive management of thousands of switches. How could we make not just a GUI? Some other products out there have tried to abstract the GUI and make a single pane of glass type thing. But where it gets interesting, and which I'll show you today, is if you can really take that advantage and then whenever possible leverage it. Take your one advantage, which is a central console that sees everything. And how can you extrapolate or exploit that vision to automate things for you with a great degree of accuracy? So we do everything in the console. There's no reason to log into a box first. I've got some boxes deployed, of course, so that way I didn't have to build a fairly decently sized network from scratch. But you can see here we're looking at a nice little map of the United States. I've got some sites online. Normally the demo that we give involves a company which has an MPLS network and they're feeling the bandwidth bite and they're looking to add cheap internet breakout and work across that, which we do quite well. But some of the things I want to show you instead of just going through the traditional demo, which is here's how you add bandwidth and here's how you route Salesforce out the internet and keep phones across the MPLS. Everybody does that in a certain degree of either what you think is cool or what you think is kludgy. But I wanted to show a few of our advantages off today. So I've got some sites here. Basically what you do is in the console, everything that you see is not exactly what the product does. It's actually automating several things on the back end. So right now I have a site, I have a location, this is the Global Realty Company. And here under organization is where I set some very basic parameters. I don't spend much time. But then I have this thing called sites. And we have this architecture where sites are still physical places where people go to work, right? These are buildings, these are data centers, these are places where things need to exist. And those sites have zones. Zones are subnets. And you can filter and you can do all sorts of neat stuff here. But the idea is that this is one of the only places in our product where you need to sit down and tell it a little bit about the infrastructure that you have. I have a site, it's called Dallas. It has this subnet 1027.00/24, and that's where I'm going to put my workers. I have a 1028.00, something like that, or 10.028.0, where I have my phones. And from that point, the system can do things like automatically assign VLANs, which you can change, of course. And why that gets interesting is that I can build all of my sites at all of my locations, and I never have to have a physical appliance to start. I always hated that about cloud-managed products where you had to plug them in, they had to come online, and at that point you could connect them, and at which point they showed up in the cloud console where you could then configure them and set some of the parameters. So we wanted to make it so that a company or a partner could deploy an entire network and design everything from the ground up, even spend a week doing it, and they didn't have to schedule downtime. They didn't have to plug boxes in at their branch, configure it, and then move it somewhere else and hope the configuration remained portable and things like that. So just building a company network where your sites and your zones and your IP addresses and everything could be pre-done allows you to do things offline, and then you don't have to worry about how to translate it from your notes and planning software into physical appliances because you've already done that work. And to facilitate that, down here under appliances, we have this concept of, yes, you can do zero-touch provisioning where you can take a box, plug it in, enter its serial number, and it'll come online. But even more importantly, you can build the entire product. Our whole line is available with these things that we call shadow appliances. So if I want to create a shadow appliance for a site I've made called Dallas, I actually can say, I have my SDI 130 gateway, and I want to put that into a site called Dallas. Dallas, it's just a pin on the map. I said there's an address, and there's a couple of subnets there. It has no appliance. And a shadow appliance is a cardboard cutout of an appliance, and it will behave exactly like an appliance in terms of configuration. So I can set it all up. I can configure the hardware channels I want a shadow appliance access point to talk on. I can configure transmit strengths. I can configure ports on switches. I can do everything as if I had the appliance. The difference is the appliance isn't actually online yet. And so that allows me to spec out my entire network the way that I want. So I deployed an SDI 130 gateway here. It actually, if I filter for Dallas, you can see nothing else exists here, just this, and it's a shadow appliance. But when I click on it, I can actually configure things like what I want the IPs to be. The system's already realized that since I had 2 internet connections configured for Dallas that wasn't applied to a piece of hardware, the shadow appliance would be a great thing to plug those internet connections into. So it did some of the work that normally I would have to do manually in the traditional space. This appliance does have a Wi-Fi access point in there, so I can configure all of the parameters around this gateway without actually having the gateway. And when it comes time to actually deploy the gateway in the real world, all I have to do is enter its serial number and plug it in. I can even enter the serial number ahead of time and simply ship the appliance somewhere and say, secretary, orange wire into port number 1 and wire to the switch into port number 3, for example. And I see exactly what happens. So it's just plugging things in, not telnetting into a console, uploading a provisioning script, trying to get a license key into it, the things that really slow down mass deployments at multiple sites. I will actually do that. Let me just register this appliance to show what appliance provisioning actually looks like. So at our site here, if I come back to my map, you can see poor Dallas is down here. He's orphaned. He's all by himself. He's not online at all. I think the monitors will show that, no problem. And if I actually want to take my shadow appliance and register a physical appliance that I'm going to ship out or that I have shipped out, if I actually filter for Dallas here and I click on it, I can actually go actions and I can say register hardware, and I'll just paste in the serial number. Now, that means this appliance will now be registered with the zero-touch provisioning system. The appliance will come online, and as soon as it comes online, it'll actually get its latest configuration. I don't have to worry about patching and updating. That's all handled automatically by the system. Our appliances reboot in a matter of seconds. It's already online. Now that it's online, the system will actually see things about this appliance, like what is its current public IP address? Where is it talking from? What are the zones behind it? All of the pieces of information that a network admin needs to build a VPN tunnel. So at that point, we don't want to make you build a VPN tunnel. This box will actually join the mesh framework that we've established, which we call AutoVPN. And as I'm talking here, you'll see Dallas will actually connect to the other sites that are online with this particular AutoVPN technology. So I won't actually have to enter a single remote IP, no remote gateway. I don't have to manually create security policies. The routing and topology framework is handled by us in a fully automated fashion. Now, like almost anything we do, you can log in and you can dive a little bit deeper and you can change things. You can make them leaf sites. You can choose to have them not be full mesh, things like that. And the routing framework is the possibility of traffic to go someplace. The policy engine actually dictates what's allowed to flow over that routing framework. So we do give you a very high degree of granular security that you can make use of course.
So you say you don't configure those things, but that's because you configure them up front, correct?
Right, so you did tell the site that it has this particular subnet, right? I mean, it'd be really cool, and we're looking at ways that we can just import the subnets that are there and things like that when the appliance comes online. But and so that we largely obfuscate the IP addresses from the client. They don't have to enter a whole bunch of information, but some of the base information that we require is what are the WAN links that are available there? What are they, static IPs? Are they PPPoE, stuff like that? And then what are the subnets?
So from an implementation standpoint, it becomes very architecture heavy and very engineering light. And then O&M is managed a lot easier because you've got the interface that's allowed to manage out the infrastructure.
That's correct. And ahead of the time here, when I was actually playing with this ahead of time, I actually went and I edited our route VPN, and I actually took Dallas out of there. So I'm just going to add them back in. Normally you don't have to do that, but otherwise the demo starts up a little bit funny. So let me just hit submit on that. And by actually joining those networks to the auto VPN WAN, that will cause the VPN tunnel to get built. So normally it would just happen by itself, but ahead of time I stripped it out so that that pin would just be all by itself and not show a bunch of down VPNs, because otherwise people go, why is that all offline? So yeah, the idea there is that rather than have to sit down and manually configure all the things that you want, you tell it a little bit about what you have, and then the appliances will simply execute the desired configuration. So that's kind of key to the whole concept I'm about to show you.
Can you, with that shadow appliance, when you said design it up front,
Yeah.
and then from there put the hardware in, can you run simulations against the shadow appliance to see what might happen?
Yeah, we have lots of plans for, as of today, no, you can't dictate like what will happen. You can't say, show me what kind of lines will look like and things. But we have plans to kind of further extend our shadow appliances. Now that Riverbed's really pouring a lot of information and money and stuff into this, we have a really exciting year plan for new features and things like that, which we can talk about in roadmap. But one thing that I can offer is, think of the hardware as a foot soldier in like the war, right? So the Eye of Sauron's looking around and seeing everything, and the appliance is just the silly orc that gets told what to do. In the same manner, if that orc's standing on the parapet and gets shot by an arrow, all of the information he possesses is not lost. So what happens is, let's say that somebody spills coffee on that appliance. One of the biggest problems in network security is just, who had the last backup? How do I get a new appliance in there? Did you have it emailed to you? Is it encrypted? What was the password? How do I get that configuration back in that appliance to minimize downtime, whether I'm using HA or not? It actually goes both ways, which is really cool. We try to take our software abstraction automation and leverage it, like I said before, in both directions. So if I come to this appliance, and for whatever reason I want to make a change, I can actually go backwards. I can come here and I can drop the hardware, which actually removes the hardware completely from the picture and actually drops it back to a shadow appliance. So I haven't lost my whole configuration or anything. I could just re-register in another serial number from a different appliance, and I'm back up and running in that same amount of time. So the hardware really is just the execution piece that does what the Cloud Console says it should look like configuration-wise. And that way, you remove a lot of barriers in traditional multi-site network management, because you're not tied to the hardware and what it's capable of, or when it fails, what you're losing. We tried to engineer things with lots of experience in network security where we saw that customers and partners had pain. And one of the big ones is, great, everything's in this Cloud Console. Is it secured? Yes. Does it support two-factor authentication and multi-roles? Absolutely. Things that you need in a product like this, where this is a kingdom. But more importantly, if you look at this type of architecture and how things are secured, there's security mechanisms in place to keep it so someone can't just register an appliance in that you don't know about. They can't steal the appliance and take it home. Otherwise, you'll know about it. There'll be offline time. There's unlock codes. There's things around that protect that ease of use to keep it from being easily exploited as well. So the idea that you can get appliances, make them shadow appliances, and drop them back, basically the appliances themselves are simply members that join that mesh framework that actually help your VPN connectivity across the entire company. Now, for illustrative purposes here, we have some MPLS connections. In this case, the MPLS stuff, when you get more into the SD-WAN and away from the SD-LAN, you could have an MPLS connection delivered by a provider, and it's responsible for giving you one possible doorway out of the organization. And some organizations backhaul everything to their headquarters, but it's a very increasing situation where customers say, I've added a couple of internet connections, and there are applications I don't need to send out to the internet over the MPLS. MPLS bandwidth is precious, it serves a purpose, but when I can buy a 50 megabit cable connection from Comcast, why not just allow me to go right to Salesforce? It's a trusted app. I don't need to filter it and things like that. And so that's where the SD-WAN and the automation stuff actually starts becoming very dividends paying when it comes to implementing our infrastructure. So I could say, for example, that all of the networks in the company are part of both the MPLS network, and I can give them the option to talk over the public internet over an encrypted link as well. So now I can backhaul all traffic to the headquarters over an internet VPN or over the MPLS. And that just gives me basic steerage that allows me to make decisions. But where it gets interesting is when I can start making pathing rules that dictates which links traffic should take. Should they actually go to the internet directly from each branch? That's something that most businesses like, but if you've ever tried to configure breakout rules at 50 different branches or 500 branches, it's a simple goal, but it's awfully a tedious thing to execute because you have to manually touch a bunch of stuff. So I thought I'd take you through an example of just what some of that looks like. We have this section here called WANs, and I have Route VPN, which that's our VPN technology connecting things over the internet. And then we have a provider MPLS link as well. So I'm just going to add some of these networks to both WANs. So I'll just click on it, and I'm just going to add a few more. Multi-select is missing, but we are going to add that pretty quickly because that doesn't demo so well sometimes. So if I add some of these LANs to let them all talk over the auto VPN, that means that they're already talking over MPLS. We'll just give them another possible door that they can connect over. And again, that actually doesn't start traffic flowing. It just gives them possibilities. And then I'll talk about our security policy engine in just a minute. So now the visualizations here, they tend to favor green tends to be our VPN technology until we have an update that adds some more colors here. Red was the MPLS connections, but they're going to start coming green as the system will build VPN tunnels. And right now I have it set so that a few of these sites are leafs of the bigger sites. But it doesn't have to be that way. Traditionally, I often ask companies why they're not using a full mesh. You can see it's already built like 15 or 20 VPN tunnels as I was talking there. A lot of companies don't use full mesh simply because of the added complexity of like, well, the sites don't really need to see each other. And if they do, it's expensive to make a whole bunch of VPNs because it goes up by N for every site you want to add to the mesh, right? If anybody's ever configured like 16 sites, configuring the 17th is a lot of work as you go back and touch everything again. But because we see everything, just to add the appropriate path network in there, if I come back here to a site, let me pick one. And we'll say our Fresno guys here, I'm just going to turn off the leaf, which I actually turned on by default, that's off. If I turn off the leaf at a few of these sales offices here in this real estate company, what's going to happen is they'll start reaching out and they'll start talking to everything else, and they'll advertise the appropriate routes and the appropriate subnets, which I can dive into and remove. I can be as granular as we like. But what's going to happen is it's going to start building an actual VPN framework. So the appliances will quickly recycle their config. We won't be offline for more than a few seconds or so, depending on how fast and how many it has to build. And you'll start seeing some crazy lines as things start meshing together. And while that's doing that, you can see it's going to start building VPNs like crazy. So we normally don't start with that because there's a lot of lines going across the map to start with, and it's a bit to digest. But that's the default behavior. Whereas a new appliance comes online, by default, it will try to just join the fabric across the VPN, across the entire company, and not be a single point that you have to then backhaul and do transitive routing and stuff like that from. So we know the subnets that you've asked to be part of the WAN. We know the VPN IPs, the parameters for the security policy. We know the remote networks and the local networks. So with that, we can build VPNs for you with a high degree of accuracy that you can still customize. Where it gets interesting is across the entire company. Because of that level of visibility, we give you something that's not normally possible when it comes to building policy rules. Normally when I log into a customer's policy engine, they have hundreds of rules, but at the very base level, a policy rule is simply a goal, right? The admin has the goal that something should or should not be able to see something else. The problem with that is a lot of times those goals are site-specific because of the different topologies, the architectures, the subnets, and things involved. So as these sites come up and they start building VPNs to other sites, a rule I want to give you an example of is because we see everything, we can get through with what we call kind of like a dynamic firewall. So if I have the goal that the desktops in the company should be able to see different LANs, I can do all of that in one rule, because in this case, it doesn't matter where the desktop is at which site. If it's in the group desktops, the system can interpret where that desktop is, what IP it is, if it's in that desktop groups, and it can dynamically open the firewall just as little as possible to allow that rule to be valid for that desktop at that site. Another example might be something on a user base, which I'll talk about if you have more interest there. But let me just make a quick rule here that says if I want to make a rule on a selected user, and I grab a user that says John Smith. So now John Smith is a guy, and I say he should be able to see something. Now, I can pick a certain application, a certain group. Let's just make it any for today. And I said, John Smith is allowed to see anything. He has unrestricted access in this case. Now, in this case, John Smith is a collection of John's devices. He might have a laptop, an iPad, a MacBook, all sorts of good stuff. This gets really interesting because the system will know in real time where John's devices are. So if John is now always working out of San Francisco, but he happens to need to go to the Fresno office, and he shows up in the Fresno office and he takes his laptop and he plugs it into the wall on the wall socket, which is connected to some switch which is totally unconfigured. The system will see, John should be a member of this VLAN, so let's map that VLAN to that switch port in real time, and let's make it so that the policy engine is open to keep that rule valid. John should be able to go anywhere. So not only can we automate the security policy, but the automation can actually configure our infrastructure objects like our appliances in real time to continue to keep that policy valid. And that's where it gets a little bit different than it's very, in my opinion, it's very easy to make a GUI for appliances in a central place. It's a lot different when you get into the visibility that shows you how those appliances can really work together if you design it that way, which we've done.
How are you determining who users are? Is there like a MAC address mapping? How are you connecting users to devices?
Yeah, so at its basic, I'll actually show what it looks like here. Let me just close this tab here. Basically, I'm going to actually violate my family's privacy and I'll use my home firewall here because that has a lot of devices that are online. So a device, a user is just a bucket. It's a label, Angelo. And in that bucket goes devices that are attributed to me. How they get in there is the administrator of the system can place them in there, and that's done by MAC address. So our lowest common denominator is the MAC, and that way we don't care which IP that box pulls in certain, we can do lots of trickery there in terms of making it cool. But at the end of the day, if I click on a user and I pick on myself, Angelo, and I want to look at my devices here, you can see that Angelo currently has an iPad, he has some other devices. Let's find my son on here, and there he is, and he has a MacBook Air. Now this is where the visibility stuff gets interesting because I click on the MacBook Air and it dives me right into that device and all the information the cloud controller has on that device. So currently it's offline, it's inactive. It was last seen with this IP, 192.168.50.30, and it was located talking to our AP5 in the media room at the headquarters, and he was a member of this LAN. So we actually see a lot of information about where that device was, and that forensic information is used to influence the security policy in real time. So if he changes location, if he's talking in a different access point in a different office, the security policy can adapt to keep that rule that riders should be allowed to go someplace, can keep that valid.
Being tied to a MAC address, that doesn't scale in an enterprise, right? You can't enter everybody's MAC address
Right.
and tie it to a device. So
Yeah.
how do you resolve that?
So there's a couple of things, some things we have today and some things we have coming, because I agree, entering MAC addresses by hand is not only inefficient, in my opinion, it's quite stupid, because if you sit down and say, great, your 3,000 devices, you can control them with great detail, just get typing. Some people take the route that they want to just sync with Active Directory, which we can do. Right now today, when you sync with Active Directory, that actually creates the users for you, so that creates the buckets. That doesn't yet sync possible fields you have to import their registered devices on the system. Our first attempt at that, which we have already, which works quite well, is we have a device inventory management system. So let's pretend the network is nice and clean and you've binned things, or you simply plug in a gateway for the first time. All the devices which aren't known to the system pop up here in our unregistered devices wizard. So they say, hey, there's things on the network which are currently not in any bucket whatsoever. So when I click on a device, we give you as much information as we can by talking to the device itself and probing it for some fancy magic stuff, which if you're super technical isn't all that magical. Now this is a demo environment, so excuse some of the unregistered stuff in here. But basically I can see that a few days ago, let's go down here. So this device, this MAC address was seen. It was talking on a certain, in this case we've deleted the SSID, but it actually tells you where you saw it, what IP address it has, what sort of labels it has applied to it. And you basically see that the second that it sends one packet. So if I log in again to my box back here and I find my iPhone, let's look for Angelo here. I'll just show you how fast that actually is. My network's completely registered. There's nothing on it that's unregistered. And let's find my iPhone on here. Oops, I think I called it Angelo's iPhone. I delete it a lot and I sometimes change it. So there it is. So if I delete my iPhone here, which is in my pocket, which isn't going to work, so maybe I should use something else that's actually at my house. Just give me 1 second. Let's try this. Do I have anything that's actually online here right now? Let's see. No, I don't. I'll use something different next time. Maybe my wife's home, we can violate her privacy too, because there you go. So my wife's iPhone right there. If I delete that, so now that's gone. So the second that that device makes any traffic, it'll instantly show up as an unregistered device. So I'm hoping she's home. So there it is right there. It instantly says a packet flowed through the system from a device that I didn't know. So when I click on it, I can go back to my unregistered device list, and I can see that this is an Apple device, where it's talking to, which SSID it's joined. So in this case, she actually was allowed on the network, but she's on the network as an unregistered device. And I can have a totally separate security policy for unregistered devices. I can say they're not allowed to go anywhere. They're only allowed to go to one certain site. So even if I run a not enterprise network, I have a simple name and password for my Wi-Fi, and you give it to a friend who's on the network, he's still an unregistered device.
Can you push unregistered devices to like some onboarding page or onboarding process?
Yeah, so it depends on if they're on the corporate LAN or a guest LAN. So as a guest LAN, we can spin up a separate guest LAN. If they log that, they can be directed to an onboarding portal, which gives them the chance to enter a mobile phone number or an email address to register themselves as a guest. And guests are completely walled garden over the same infrastructure. So the same access point can, of course, display multiple SSIDs. They're completely segregated networks.
So this is like, where you can start to see the power of orchestration when you have a lot of touch points, right? So we have, large retail customers, and they have a simple policy that says, any guests going into their store must not, commingle with any of our business traffic. And that should be true over a wide area network. It should be true if they physically plugged into a switch. It should be true what they're doing from a Wi-Fi connectivity standpoint. And that basically is one policy.
And you can do it across all locations. So, and I'll show you that in a second. Let me finish this one train of thought. To register a device, so I don't have to type the MAC address, you just click register and assign it to my wife's bucket here. And I can also give her tags. You can make policy rules by user, by device groups, by policy tags. So we have all sorts of really cool things there from the security background that you can do. And I just do that, and instantly that device now gets placed in her bucket, and that device inherits all the permissions she has on the policy rule, as well as if I put it in the iPhone group, it might have extra policies associated to iPhones and things like that as well.
Okay, so two questions. One is bouncing off of the guest. Can we BYOD onboard employees on a certain SID?
Yep.
Okay.
So right now we have a portal, and traditionally in some of these products, the portal is reserved for the guest access. And you're like, well, why can't I do that for my employees, right? So you can actually, we have this fancy little section here called portals, where you can enable a portal on the actual, we actually call this the user portal, not a guest portal. Gotcha. And this way, things on the network that are new, they have the chance to authenticate. And adding on to that, we also plan to give the admin permission. So if Josh comes in, he has the password for the SSID, check. He joins, he's on an unregistered device, and it says, welcome to the employee network. If you're an employee and you are registered to the system ahead of time, we should be able to use your mobile number to two-factor authenticate. So he does that, but I'm a paranoid admin and I still don't trust that. And with our fancy iPhone app, you then get a push notification that says, Josh Dobies has requested to add this device to his user bucket and has passed all tests. Do you want to allow yes or no? So you can take it even a step further as well.
And then, do you support any .1x?
No, but that is coming. We do plan to, you'll see that this year from us. We're working on it right now.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's the final piece that we need, right? Because then you can control it from end to end. So as of today, you can do Active Directory and Google Apps authentication for user buckets. There's a complete registration system for devices, so you should never have to type a MAC address unless you really want to ahead of time. And we're working on ways to import the existing places where you might have done your MAC inventory already so that things can be pre-registered ahead of time.
Are you adding Facebook and Twitter? Because I know a number of other portal devices will add that.
That's already in there.
And because you just mentioned Google and Active Directory. The other question is, as far as someone connects and you authorize this device is now connected onto the Wi-Fi, for example.
Yes.
Do you set up established encryption keys and stuff like that to handle that end-to-end relationship for it?
So the devices themselves, when they join the network in place, are you talking about like if they're offsite and they're trying to make VPNs back, or just the device itself?
Just the device itself.
Yeah, there's not any extra levels of, they're under the protection of the Wi-Fi and things like that. However, I've deployed that if I'm using enterprise authentication. But the device itself, my laptop is a simple network connection that's either allowed or disallowed by the system today.
Okay.
So this, I think I know the answer to this, but you've got your own Wi-Fi
Yes.
that does all this. You've got your firewall appliances.
Yes.
That's basically the same as the WAN edge that goes over MPLS or internet, right?
Yeah, we have a gateway, and into that gateway you can plug our switches and other pieces of our infrastructure, or you can simply plug in internet connections, and the gateway you can have clients plug directly into it as well.
Okay, so for all of this to work, perfect world, it's got to be all Riverbed.
Well, that's the idea, because I will say that yes, you need our stuff, and the reason is that when we looked at building this, I had looked at every product in the past that had claimed to be able to manage other companies' stuff, and nobody had ever done that with a degree that I thought was acceptable. It was always more promises than it was success.
Yeah.
So two answers to that is that to get the best of our automation, we need to know our stuff, because it's all built to be optimized, and I'll give you a few more examples. But this auto VPN framework that gets generated, it is possible to talk other devices onto it, such as I have a Cisco box over here and I really want to VPN that box in, I can't replace it today. No problem. We actually call that classic VPN. and that's down here. And that allows you to build a VPN tunnel in a more traditional way where we don't support the full mesh. It's a single point because building full mesh for other devices is hard. But I could make something and call this old style, for example. And the remote gateway, so the site is at, I'll just borrow an address, and it's using the typical 192.168.0.1 or 0.0/24.
Yeah.
And I want that site, or that particular location to talk to my Denver headquarters, for example. And over that connection, I want to share only one network. I could pick all of them if I want. That just allows the route tables to be populated correctly. And when I do that, when I create a classic VPN, at that point, we could stop there and it would be good enough. But we're trying to make it different. So now you get a nice screen that dictates not only how you should configure your legacy side with the proper VPN parameters. We're ready for it. You just need to talk to the other side. But we also give you a couple of buttons to download the config with some Cisco or some Fritzbox stuff, and we try to automate that a little bit as well. So it's very similar to what Amazon Web Services does in supporting third-party VPN. We set up the connection, we make it ready, and it's up to you to go configure the legacy product as to how to get it to talk to us. So you can onboard anything that speaks IPsec into our system,
Okay.
which I think is nice of us.
And as a gateway for just regular internet access, is the firewall stateful?
Absolutely.
And does it support IPv6?
Yes, we're all IPv6 all the way through because, we come from that background. So absolutely. So if you have IPv6 on your WAN link, it'll pull that down and you can use IP6 on your LAN, no problem at all. Actually, on my network there that I showed you, I think on this one here, if I look at some devices, you'll actually see, if I look through some registered devices here, some of these actually have some IPv6 information. You can see it right there. It's pulling some down there. So absolutely.
And the SteelConnect manager is hosted entirely in the cloud, or can you do an on-premises version?
Yeah, let's talk about that. So, of course, the cloud console is a really important piece. So we thought, what do other people do, and how can we make that better? So the first thing is, by default, Riverbed hosts it for you as a service. So if you sign up and you want to be a partner, or you want to host your own company and things like that, we provide it. We also provide it in a very unique way in that it's yours. You have full access. We can't even get into it unless you let us in. And at the same time, if the cloud console completely dies and goes away, all of the boxes that are deployed in the real world continue to function with the last known config. So the entire network doesn't come crashing down because for 5 minutes they haven't been able to talk to the cloud console, right? Things just run. And there's lots of things we could talk about with more time as to how you can move organizations around to different controllers and things. For the summer release that we have planned, you'll also be able to self-host this controller on premise. So if you would like to run it in a place where you can see and touch and taste it, the cloud controller can run, for example, in your own Amazon infrastructure. It could run in your data center on VMware. And that allows you full control over the environment as to how you apply backups and safeguards and things like that to it.
So it's available VMware, KVM, because of Amazon, Azure.
Yeah, so in
maybe.
fact, the entire framework is kind of platform agnostic. So while you do like our appliances, I mean, there's things that we can't virtualize, like a virtualized switch or a virtualized access point is hard, but for the gateways, they actually come in lots of different flavors. So we have them as different appliance sizes, but just like we plan to offer the self-hosting in a virtual environment as well. If I look at an appliance here, you'll see this Dallas appliance is a shadow appliance, right? If I actually delete this appliance and I want to make a new one, shadow appliances can't yet be turned to virtual appliances, but you'll see here that I have another option here called Create Software Gateway. So if I don't want, or if I have a pressing need to not use a physical appliance, I can say that I want to make a virtual environment for Dallas instead of one of our physical appliances, and I'll drop that in there instead. And without any trade-off, it's the same image that's actually running on our hardware. And from there, when I do that, you'll see if I click here, scroll down a little bit, and I can actually build the image in my virtualization package of choice, which is not going to show up, or it will. Let me just try that one more time.
But then it popped away.
It goes away again if I don't pick something. So you can actually download the gateway right from the software in your VMware of choice. It'll boot up. It'll join it'll create the auto VPN framework. It'll behave just like a real appliance with the number of ports and things that you have. And the SDN type product, the SDN type aspect of the product means that not only do we see the devices and we see the port that you have on the appliances, but we can tell you, the admins love this, with great detail, everything that's plugged in what way. So I'll finish with that before I turn it over to Josh for some more stuff here. I think we're getting close on time.
If we have 5 minutes for roadmap, we have 5 minutes more for you.
Okay. So let me just quickly show them the ports thing here, is that we know the appliances, we know what IPs they have, we know where they're talking. If I show you the ports, we actually tell you exactly what's plugged in with great detail to everything else. So if I look at this S24, which is a bigger model of the one that's on the table here, and I can see that currently There is 6.3 watts of power at one, there's a 1 gig link here on port 7, and it's currently in the headquarters. There's an AP5R plugged into that port, one of our own products, and there's currently 4 Macs. And if I click on it, it actually shows me the 4 things that are talking to that port on that switch in that office anywhere in the world, and I see all that from a single pane of glass. So not only do I know which devices are on the network, I know with great accuracy exactly where they are and how they're integrating with the entire WAN infrastructure.
So it gives us visibility from an east-west standpoint of who's talking to who, but does it give us a sense of what they're talking about at that point?
Yeah, so that segues into more. We should probably book a bigger session for this, but yeah, that would be the good thing that we can show you at a very quick level. Like if I click visibility, we'll start building traffic timelines here company-wide. I can filter for sites, and we can even expand on that with some of the things we have coming in the roadmap, which Josh will talk about. But yeah, I can see it looks not very good on this resolution, but I can see every packet, every flow, what's going where, who's talking to who, what traffic they're making. There's a lot of information available that we normally don't show on a very quick demo like this, but it's all in there. I want to leave you with one piece, is that we have this framework available. This Auto VPN framework is available across our appliances. It's across virtual gateways that you download and install yourself. And we also take that fabric and we're extending it to as many places as we can. So as of today, you can also come into the product. You can go to network design. You can go to our Amazon Web Services connector that we have. I can get a complete list of all of my VPCs in all regions. And I can simply select one that I would like to connect. So here's one in Asia Pacific and Seoul. I can say I'd like to connect this VPC subnet to the system. It will automatically plumb that particular VPC as a site. I don't have to type it out. It adds it as a site. It adds the zone automatically. And when I'd like to tie it in, I can choose deploy gateway, and I can pick an instance size that I'd like to deploy. And it will now deploy an Amazon machine image of this SteelConnect gateway into Amazon and automatically plumb it into the entire Auto VPN framework for me. So that'll probably create more questions than we have time for, but I can talk with you after about it. But basically, you can take the Auto VPN and you can extend it to any cloud region, connect clouds together, connect VPCs together with your physical world. And we are working really hard to extend that to Azure as well. So we have a lot of cool things that this product can keep delivering on. But I'll turn it over to Josh for a bit of roadmap. And if you want if you'd like to know more, we can chat for as long as you have time.
Any final questions for Angelo before we pass it over? This last piece in terms of the cloud connectivity is I think particularly interesting as we look at a lot of app dev going on in the cloud, and these days a lot of that connectivity is backhauled into your data center, so you have one single place to link your VPN into that VPN. And what we've been noticing is for these
branches, especially
branches, development shops, if they're going hybrid, it's a no-brainer to start just having direct access from each of those sites into Amazon and Azure.
And almost every business wants to do this, and the reason they don't is they're just like, listen, I've got stuff in 4 different AWS regions, for example, and now you tell me I have to connect 60 branches to 4 AWS regions. That's going to take me 2 years of just plumbing.
So AWS is here today. Azure is coming in the future.
We have a prototype in Azure working. We're working hard to actually make that
plans for GCP?
Yeah, so there's really, I'm the technical director of cloud now, so the faster we get the fingers on the keyboards, there's no reason why this framework shouldn't be extensible everywhere. So the nice thing is the virtual stuff is available today. So anything that can boot to VM can join our framework. Where that gets really interesting is not just leaving the people to their own devices to find these clouds and try to plumb it all together. Because usually cloud networking is the thing people understand the least. So from our instrumentation and orchestration here, if you can just automatically create VPN tunnels by automating the stack and using API commands to those clouds, that means that not only can we integrate, but we can automate it, which is the huge part. While I'm sitting here talking to you over the next 5 minutes, I'm going to bring on an entire Amazon cloud region in Korea and connect it to all of my VPN sites. And I'm not having to type a single VPN parameter. The security policy rules I made apply across that as long as I don't have closed Amazon security groups and stuff like that. But it's a very powerful implication that I really don't see our competitors doing in this way.
Going back to the Wi-Fi, I know you have the Wi-Fi built into the unit itself. What if you have an office that needs more coverage? Do you just add another one of these devices, or do you have access points?
We have dedicated access points, small, medium, extra large ones. And so actually, I think we had a couple of these registered on here. I should have to check if we have the, if I look at the appliances here, there might be an access point. There, Denver HQ actually has a small AP3 online right now. And basically, you just plug them in anywhere in the office. They know that if there's a gateway there, they should talk through the gateway, and they automatically will. We're just finishing some auto tuning stuff, so it's amazing how many network people don't understand that wireless stuff should be on different channels, for example, to avoid overlap and things. So we can automate quite a bit of that. So you can blanket a total building.
You're completely automating a lot of the Wi-Fi. So and is it your access points or is
they're ours, built, and we build them. We designed them. They're obviously based on some open available. I mean, there's like 2 or 3 Wi-Fi vendors if you go into the chipsets and all the other stuff. But our appliance design, our antenna design, everything about them is our design. Yeah,
Wave
absolutely.
2?
Sorry?
Wave 2?
Not yet. No, he's good. No, we have we have a couple of different appliances that we have today. I mean, our latest one is our AP5. We call it's a AC capable access point. They get really good throughput. The nice thing is you can simply plug them in all over the place, and they do kind of an auto blanket thing, which works quite well. And it removes a ton of information when it comes to make one SSID here in the product under Wi-Fi, hit the broadcast and choose to broadcast it at 50 sites, and all the access points configure themselves, map themselves into the local LAN. You can do some very powerful abstraction there.
dual band?
Yeah, absolutely.
And then are you going to publish how you're automating that, like your algorithm, like
The blanketing kind of?
Yeah.
Yeah, so the one piece that still needs to work is the appliances themselves deploy, and the pieces that we're working on for roadmap stuff is getting a little bit more investment. We were really going strong on Wi-Fi, and then the Riverbed acquisition and all of the things happened there to really kind of do the transfer of information. It didn't cost us time, but we just shifted our focus to the gateways and the SD-WAN type stuff. So on the wireless thing, we're now coming back to that and reinvesting even more so that we can do auto-tuning of access points, and we can do like automatic full mesh and bridging and things, stuff that just doesn't, it has different use cases, but by default, you plug appliances in, they work, and you get great Wi-Fi coverage, and now we can just really pour gas on that to make it better.
Any plans to integrate with any other partners in the event that they, for whatever, a customer is like, I've already made an investment of 600 access points, I'm not buying new access points to replace those, where you can actually tie into it, APIs or stuff along those lines?
I think we do plan to have our own API at some point, and how we, again, getting back to how we automate other people's stuff is usually a Pandora's box that I wouldn't have any interest in. I would rather simply find a way we could buy their 600 access points back and get them our access points instead, because it's
We've all been down that road. It
Yeah.
doesn't work, and it gets harder when you get into education as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's also really tough trying to. I mean, I'm always interested to see who is actually able to automate vendor A with vendor B and get them to play together correctly. Most of the time, the data sheets are way better than the products, and I think usually they end up causing you more pain than it would have been to rip access points out and go again. So the good news is you don't have to, right? If you have a 600 access points from vendor A and you use our stuff instead, our gateways, that's no problem. The Wi-Fi stuff still sits there. We don't block it or interfere with it. You just don't get some cool automation benefits that
Okay, that's cool.
So you can upgrade when you're comfortable.
Where does that manager sit?
The manager that we use today, currently today, that one's provided part of the Riverbed hosting infrastructure, and that one is actually running in AWS regions, depending on where you want it located.
So if I'm a customer, then you provide that manager.
By default, yeah. So by default, it's a hosted service, and then the self-hosting is coming a little bit later. We're working on that with all hands for our summer release.